we're going to talk about how some of the restrictions on immigration law affect people in different statuses in the U.S. and what some of the solutions are. Could I ask, how many people are here from China? How many people here from India? How many people are here from other countries? And probably a mix of other countries. How many of you are on H-1B visas? F-1 visas? What other visas? J-1, okay. All right, so what we're going to talk about should be relevant to, I think, to all of you. So let's talk about big picture immigration in the U.S. right now. So we know that President Trump issued an executive order called Buy American, Hire American. And that has everything to do with how the Immigration Service deals with immigration issues. The whole focus is not like it's been in other years that we want to find ways of welcoming more immigrants to the U.S. It's more, well, are immigrants taking jobs from Americans? Shouldn't we be hiring Americans? It's a very, very different focus than really I've ever seen in all the years I've been doing immigration. That doesn't mean that it's impossible to help people. It means it's going to be maybe a little bit more work to come up with a good solution. It is the policy of the Trump administration to significantly cut back on legal immigration to the U.S. If you read the newspapers and you go online, it's all about illegal immigrants and people at the border and all this stuff. Yeah, that's going on. But what's not talked about as much is that they are trying to cut back legal immigration by 50%. And we're going to see as we go through how they're trying to do that and how we're going to solve some of those problems. The main restrictions we've been seeing relate to H-1Bs, L-1s, that's corporate transfers, EB-1C also relates to corporate transfers, and EB-1A is a green card based on what's called extraordinary ability. That's been where most of the restrictions have been. And as we talk, we're going to see that the demand for U.S. immigration remains extremely high. But the supply of visas remains at the same level it was about 30 years ago. And that's a problem. And that creates waiting lists. So we have to see how that's going to impact what we're doing. So first we need to understand that we're going to be talking today about both non-immigrant and immigrant visas. Non-immigrant visa is a temporary visa. It's not a green card. It's an H-1B, it's an L-1. And the non-immigrant visa you can usually obtain pretty quickly. But it doesn't lead to green card, doesn't lead to citizenship. The immigrant visa is the green card process. And in most cases, that's going to take longer to get. We're going to be dealing with country quotas. So we're going to see that if you're from India or China, you're likely to have a longer wait in pretty much anything we're talking about than people from other countries. The green card leads to U.S. citizenship. You're never required to become a citizen, but you can usually after five years. Usually your family can get a green card with you. There are both self-sponsored and employer-sponsored green cards. So the self-sponsored green cards, where you don't need an employer to apply for you, are basically, if you have extraordinary ability, you're one of the best in your field in the country, or the world, or your country, or EB-5, which we're going to talk about, which is a self-sponsored green card based on investment. The employer-sponsored green cards are if you're a manager of a multinational company being transferred, that's called EB-1C, and if you're getting a green card through an application by an employer, where the employer shows that there's no qualified U.S. workers to do your job, and that's called EB-2 or EB-3. There's also family-sponsored green cards, but unless you're the spouse of a U.S. citizen, the waiting list in almost all the categories is extremely long. For example, if you're the brother or sister of a U.S. citizen, it's probably a 25 to 30-year wait. So that's not a very good option. So a lot of people who are Fs or Js, the next step is going to be H-1B, and some of you are already H-1B. Now, the H-1B requires that you're in a profession that requires a specific college degree to do the job, and the employer's paying you the normal wage. And you can get it approved for 3 years and get an extension for 3 years, and then talk about a green card after that. So many of we work a lot with universities and with Fs and Js, and usually the next step is going to be H-1B, and then we're going to evaluate green card options. Now, within the last year or two, mostly the last year, there's really some serious problems developing with that course of action. First of all, the H-1B is a lottery system. You have to apply the first week of April. After that, for 51 weeks of the year, you can't even apply. And if you have a bachelor's degree, your chances of winning the H-1B lottery are about 25%. And if you have a master's in the US, it's usually somewhat over 50%. But still, it's a hard way to plan your life around winning a lottery. And that's an issue that we're dealing with. Now, it used to be, up until about the last year, up until the present administration, that if you won the H-1B lottery and you had what was traditionally a good job offer that requires a college degree, your chances of getting the H-1B approved were extremely high. The approval rate has plummeted in the last year for a whole number of reasons. There is a very restrictive interpretation of what's called specialty occupation. So if you could do a job with 2 different college degrees, they're saying it doesn't qualify as a specialty occupation. It has to be only 1 possible degree that's allowable to do the job. The Immigration Service has never before been involved in whether the wage is high enough for an H-1B. That's dealt with by the Labor Department. For the first time ever in 2018, we're seeing denials of H-1Bs because the Immigration Service doesn't think the wage is high enough. There's issues of when H-1Bs are posted at a different location, and the Immigration Service is challenging that. A lot of different things. If you're interested in it, we can talk about it, but we're a very large immigration firm, one of the largest in the country. We have about 70 of us doing immigration, and we deal with these issues all the time now. One of the really concerning things that the present administration has done is said that we will no longer give deference to any previous approval. So if we have a client who's in H-1B status, and you're going to need extensions, it's almost been automatic. If you get the H-1B the first time, you're going to get the second and third because it's the same job or you've been promoted. Now they're saying we're going to give no deference to whether we approved it before, and even though we approved it the first time, we may not approve the job for the extension. And the last thing I'll mention that's going on is that the Trump administration is trying to get rid of the ability of the spouse of an H-1B to be employed. Right now, if you're in the green card process, the H-1B spouse can work. So that's kind of the scenario that we have with H-1Bs. L1s I don't think are going to be a big issue to you guys here today, but I'll just mention what it is if you're interested. So the L1 is if you're employed by a company outside of the US, one of the last 3 years, and you're going to be transferred to an office or a branch or a subsidiary of the company in the US, you can do that on an L1. And that applies to managers and specialized knowledge employees. Again, any of this that you're interested in, I'll be happy to talk about afterwards. There's also something called an E2 visa, which has become of interest recently in places like China and India. And here's what E2 is about. The E2 is a very good visa. It's usually issued for 5 years. It allows the investor to run a business in the U.S. It allows the spouse of the investor to work anywhere he or she wants in the U.S. without sponsorship. It allows the kids to go to school in the U.S. and it can be extended indefinitely. Now, the catch is that it's only available to people who are citizens of countries that have investment treaties with the U.S. And so, for example, some of the biggest countries bringing people to the U.S., China, India, Vietnam, Brazil, Russia, have no treaties with the U.S. But what some of those folks have been doing recently is getting citizenship in a country that does have a treaty with the U.S., and that's the country of Grenada. And you can get citizenship by investing $150,000 in Grenada. You can get it within about 4 months, and then all of a sudden you are eligible for this E2 visa. Some people do that instead of the green card, and some people do that to fill the waiting list while they're waiting for the green card. All right, so those are the non-immigrant visas, the visas that people can get pretty quickly to be able to come here, stay here, work here, after their F or J status, be able to switch to that, but it's not a green card. So now we want to talk about the green card option. Now, the standard way, if you're a student, is that you're going to go from the F1 or the J1 to the H1B if you have employer sponsorship, then get the employer to sponsor you for a green card. And that is called a PERM, P-E-R-M application. And what happens is the employer has to advertise your job and show that there's no qualified U.S. workers to do your job. You're qualified, and then the Labor Department, if they're being paid the right wage, will approve a labor certification that allows you to apply for a green card in the EB2 or EB3 category. If you are from a country other than India or China, that process can work fairly well, and the waiting list is not all that long. If you're from India, the waiting list is probably at least 15 years. If you're from China, less than that, but probably 5 to 10 or more years. So that's one option that people have, but they have to be sponsored by an employer. If they leave the employer in the middle of the case, they lose. They have to start all over again. So let's say you have a 3 or 4 year waiting period. You're stuck not only with that employer, but with that exact job. Because even if you get promoted, you lose out. Because the Labor Department has tested a specific job and say there's no U.S. workers to do that job. So it's pretty restrictive, but it is an option for a green card. Then there's something called EB1. And there's 2 types of EB1s. There's no waiting list in the EB1 category except for India and China. And the waiting list for India and China is back to 2012. So, what is EB1? There's EB1 multinational manager. That's just like that L1 I talked about, right? Manager of a company overseas being transferred to be a manager of a company in the U.S. There's also something called EB1A, which is extraordinary ability. So in any field, if you have done something that has attracted national attention, you've written articles, you've been on TV, you've been written up in a newspaper, you got a patent, you know, things that really can show, yeah, I've really done something that other people have noticed. That's what an EB1A is about. So, those are the options of getting a green card. And what we increasingly find is that for many, as I mentioned, we do a lot of work with universities and university grads. And what we've increasingly found, especially in the last year or two, is that for many, none of those options I mentioned work really well for a whole host of reasons. And for a while, we were trying to see how many people we could squeeze into one of the EB1 categories, but most people don't qualify for that. So for a lot of people, and a lot more than we used to work with, EB5 has become, even if not a great option, for many it's the only option. And we're going to see what EB5 is, and then we can figure out who it works for, and if it's better than any of the other options that are available to you. So, EB5 is an investment green card. you have to invest $500,000. The interesting thing about $500,000 is it's been the same amount since 1990. It has never increased. So it's surprising, but the U.S. is one of the cheapest investment residence programs in the whole world. It wasn't in 1990, but all the others have gone way up since then, and for a variety of reasons the U.S. hasn't. You have a choice of investing in your own business, that's called direct EB-5, or investing in a regional center project. And I'm going to spend more of my time talking about regional center projects because I'd say about 90% of the EB-5s are what's called regional center investments. Now, whether it's your own business or a regional center investment, the key is that your investment must create 10 jobs for U.S. workers. That's the key to EB-5. And if you are successful in proving that you've created the jobs, and if we can show how you legally made your money that you invested, you're going to get a green card. It's called a conditional green card. It's good for 2 years. And then at the end of the 2 years, you apply to get a permanent green card as long as you haven't gotten your investment money back. So that's the big picture of EB-5. There are a lot of advantages of EB-5. First of all, you're not dependent on anybody else. You're not dependent on a family member. You're not dependent on an employer. You're on your own. There's no quota backlog for any country in EB-5 except for China, not China and India this time, but China and Vietnam. India may, at some point, there's a great demand among people from India for this EB-5 program now. It's become very popular in a number of countries, but none of those yet have a quota waiting list. The approval rate on EB-5 remains extremely high. I haven't seen the latest statistics, but they usually hover around 90% or so. Very high approval rate. It's not a one-way investment. It's not saying, here's $500,000, give me a green card. It's an investment, meaning that you are expecting to get your investment money back with some rate of return. And if you choose a good project, you will get your investment money back with some rate of return, in addition to getting a green card. You have a lot of flexibility if you're in the U.S., in whatever status you're in, F1, J1, H1, anything else, you're free to do what you want. You don't have to live where your investment is. You're not working for the investment. You can change jobs. It doesn't affect your H1. It doesn't affect anything, so you have a lot of flexibility. No geographical restrictions. You can live wherever you want. So how do you do this? You file a petition. It's called an I-526 petition. When that's approved, if you're in the U.S., you adjust your status. You don't have to leave the U.S. You can adjust your status from whatever you are, F, J, H, to green card in the U.S. When it's approved, you're a 2-year, you have a green card that's the same as everybody's green card, except yours is good for 2 years, and you have to do more applications later to get the permanent green card, as long as you haven't gotten your money back. Now, we are expecting some changes in EB-5, and if you start reading about EB-5, you're going to see that a lot of people are in a rush to file petitions. A lot of people think it's important to file petitions by the end of September, and here's what's going on. I mentioned to you that the investment amount has not changed in what, 28 years? That is likely to change. There is a very high, if I'm talking to you this time next year, I would be shocked if the investment amount is still the same. I'm expecting probably before the end of the year, some people think by September, but before the end of the year, I expect the investment amount will at least double. And so people who are interested in EB-5 would be well advised to think about doing it before the increase. If you've made your investment before the amount increases, then you're grandfathered. You're still good even if the amount increases before you get your green card. Another thing that we're watching very closely is because this program has become extremely popular, we're expecting more waiting lists to be developed. I mentioned there's waiting lists in China and Vietnam today. Again, if I'm talking to you next year, I wouldn't be surprised to see waiting lists for India, Brazil, maybe Korea. This program has existed, I said, since 1990. For a bunch of years, it was really a very unpopular program. People just didn't use it. About 10 years ago, that all changed. And this has become a vastly popular program for some of the reasons I mentioned, because there's not a lot of other good options right now. So many people have gone the EB-5 route, but the quota of the number of people that can get a green card each year has never increased. So once you have more people applying and a steady, more demand and a steady supply, everybody who applies has to wait in line. And that's done by country. So the next two countries I expect waiting lists for will be India and Brazil. I mentioned regional center versus direct EB-5, so I want to go into a little bit more detail on how this works. A direct EB-5 is pretty straightforward. You start a business, or you invest in somebody else's business. And if it's a new business, we have to show within the next couple of years your business is going to have 10 full-time U.S. workers. If you buy an existing business, we have to show in the next couple of years your business will have 10 more U.S. workers than it has when you bought it. Pretty straightforward. You can own 100% of the business, you can own 1%. You have to own some percent. You can be the active day-to-day manager of the business, but you don't absolutely have to. That's called direct EB-5. I said before about 90% of the EB-5s are regional center EB-5s. So what's a regional center? If we're going to be building a hotel over there, and hotels are very good examples of regional center projects. Hotels, apartment buildings, condos, office buildings are very normal EB-5 projects. They're usually relating to construction. And what happens is, if I'm a developer and I'm building that hotel, it may be a $200 million hotel. And I'm going to have some of my own money in the hotel. And I'm going to get a loan from a senior lender. And I'm going to have various different types of money coming in to finance the construction of the hotel. And part of that will be EB-5 investors. So it may be out of that $200 million hotel, $50 million is going to come from 100 investors investing $500,000 apiece. When you do that, you're relying not on how many employees the hotel has. In that example, with 100 investors, you would need 1,000 full-time employees if it's 10 employees per investor, right? Well, that doesn't happen. But with regional centers, you can count construction jobs, what's called indirect jobs. So even if the hotel is not successful, you still win because all of the jobs were created by the building of the hotel. So your risk is much lower. That's the concept of making a regional center investment. So there's the project that you're investing in, the hotel in that example, and then the way the government set up the program is the developer of that hotel has to work through an entity that the U.S. Immigration Service has approved to sponsor projects, and that's called a regional center. So you're looking mostly at the project developer and a little bit less at the regional center that sponsors the project. So there's two keys in choosing a good EB-5 project to invest in. What two things do you care about? Number one, you care about your green card. So you're concerned about the immigration risk. What's the chances that I'm going to do all this and not get a green card? Well, if I'm your lawyer, that's my job. My job is to help you assess the chances of getting the green card through this investment. But that's only half of what you're concerned about. It may be the most important part, because that's why you're doing this. But you also want your money back. You may not care so much of whether you're getting a quarter or a half or 1% return. That may not be the big issue in your mind. But you really are hoping to get your money back with something. And that's the financial risk of the project. And that's something that we don't do as immigration lawyers, but financial advisors will advise you on that. When you're investing in a regional center project, you will be investing the $500,000, which goes into building the office building, and you will also be paying something to the regional center, which is called an administrative fee, which is usually $50,000 to $60,000. And that's your outlay of money when you're doing EB5 for a regional center. So if we're interested so far in this concept of a regional center EB5, then the next focus is, well, what should I be looking at in choosing an EB5 project? And we're advising our clients all the time on this kind of stuff. But bringing you into one of our consultations, we're saying number one is, who are you really investing in? You're investing in a developer. Is this, if we're doing a hotel across the street, has this developer ever done a hotel before? Or have they done 50 successful hotels? Well, that's pretty relevant to me. What's the reputation, what's the experience, what's the history of the developer? Number two is there's an EB5 professional team. There's the immigration lawyer, there's a securities lawyer, there's an economist, there's a business plan writer. Have these guys done 50 or 100 successful projects, or is this their first or second? That's pretty relevant. Sometimes you come across a project where the Immigration Service has already approved the project. And that's called an exemplar approval, and that's a big deal. All right? That means the Immigration Service has looked at all the stuff and said it looks okay. Sometimes you come across a project where other investors have invested in it and they've already been approved. That's a plus. There's a business plan that the Immigration Service has to approve for these projects. You should read it. You don't need to be a lawyer, you don't need to be an expert. Does it make sense what they're talking about? If it doesn't make sense to you, it may not make sense to the Immigration Service. I said you need 10 jobs per investor. So again, on that hotel, and that I gave you the example of, if I have 100 EB5 investors, we need to prove 10 jobs per investor, or 1,000 jobs. In a construction project of a $200 million hotel, typically we're going to find through economic modeling that way over 1,000 jobs will be created. But one of the key things you want to look at is there an experienced economist who's doing a report under their name? And is there exactly 1,000 jobs? Or are there 1,500 jobs? Meaning there's lots of extra in case anything is challenged. So we're always looking for extra jobs or job push. Unfortunately, the investment has to be at risk. So normally I would say, well, I would love to get a project where there's no risk. That's the best. The only problem is if you get a project where there's no risk, it's a guaranteed denial of the EB5. Because under EB5 law, the investment must be at risk. Now there's incredibly large risk and there's pretty small risk. You're looking for pretty small risk. Another thing we're looking at is if I'm giving money to the builder building that hotel, is all the money, the rest of the money to build the hotel in place? Has the developer already given money to the project? Do they have the bank loan already? Because if I'm giving money, but then it turns out they don't have all their other sources of money, the hotel may never get built. That concerns me. Your money's going to be there for a while. And you want to make sure that they have an infrastructure, they have people in place that are monitoring the money, that are making sure the money's going where it should be, maybe some outside person like a law firm who's overseeing it, and that's something I'd be concerned about. The other part of EB5, in addition to job creation, is proving the source of your money. And this is a big deal in EB-5. And the question is not, well, I can show the source of my money. It came from that bank over there. That's not the issue. The issue is, how did it get into that bank? And sometimes we have to go back years and years and years. How did you legally make the money that you're now using to invest? Now it may be, well, I've been working for the last 10 years in the US, here's my tax returns, and you add it all up and I have plenty of money to make a $500,000 investment. That's great. Very often it's not that way. Very often, a lot of our clients, the money comes from a gift. It may be that as hard as you guys work, or maybe you're going to school, it's hard to draw a check for $500,000. So a lot of people, students and H1s, get their money from gifts, from mom or dad or aunt or uncle or grandpa or whatever. And sometimes it's from 3 or 4 people. That's perfectly fine. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong with that. However, when the money is coming from someone else, then we have to show how they legally made the money. Maybe they sold real estate. That's fine, but then how did they get the money to buy the real estate? Maybe it comes from an inheritance. Somebody died. Maybe it just comes from selling a business. Well, again, how did they get the money to buy the business? And what can we show about how the business operated? So it's a lot of work, but it's very unusual that if people legally made the money, it's very unusual we can't show that. We can almost always prove it. Sometimes easier, sometimes harder. So the money can come from in the US, or it can come from out of the US. That's perfectly fine. It is possible to borrow the money, but if you borrow the money, there are very few banks that I know of that are giving money without collateral. So then you have to show how did you earn the money to have the collateral. Okay? So that's how source of funds work. So that's kind of the picture of what's going on with immigration for people in the U.S. in F, J, H, or other status. We're dealing with temporary issues. We're dealing with trying to come up with permanent options. Some of what I talked about may make sense for some of you. For others, if no other option is available, for a lot of people, EB-5 is a very good option. Our law firm deals with everything we talked about today. Every type of visa and green card imaginable we deal with. We're over about 75 people now, just doing immigration work, and we work with lots of universities and lots of companies and lots of individuals and lots of investors. We have an EB-5 team of 20 people that speaks lots of different languages, including possibly yours. And that's what I have to tell you about the state of immigration today. Do we want to do questions or do that later or what?
We'll do it later.
And that's fine. Thank you for your attention.
Okay.